prevention strategies. Most of the notes I'm going to use today are from the Universal Prevention Curriculum for Substance Use, the UPC course. So here's an overview of our discussion. Number one, we'll talk about why substance use prevention, what's so important about it. We'll also talk about the difference between substance use in school and student substance use. They mean different things. And what then is the role of schools in prevention? Finally, towards the end of my presentation, we'll talk about components of a school-based prevention. And there are three: the school policy, school climate, and prevention curriculum. I'll walk you through each of these three components and we'll discuss the salient points. And finally, we'll summarize the session by talking about what does not work when we talk about substance use prevention in schools. So first, let's start with why is prevention of health and social problems important for any nation? We always hear the adage, prevention is better than cure. So if prevention is costly, cure is more expensive. So why then do we need to talk about prevention? Because prevention aims for health. Health is linked to rising incomes of any nation, increased productivity. Of course, if you have healthy citizens, then you'll have more productivity, and children's education, and finally, adult well-being, so the quality of life. So why is substance use prevention important? Because it has very important objectives or aims. The primary objective of substance use prevention is to help people, particularly the young people, to avoid or delay the initiation of use of of the use of substances. So if it is an inevitable that they'll be using substances sometime in their life, we will delay that. Or if they have already started using, our goal is to prevent them from developing those disorders, such as falling into dependence. Now, what is the general aim of drug prevention? The general aim of drug prevention is much broader. So it's not just preventing people from taking substances, but it's actually promoting the health and safe development of children and youth, enabling them to realize their potential and become contributing members of their community and society. So let's be clear about this. Prevention is not just stopping them or delaying their usage of substances. It's actually leading them towards choosing better choices. Now, I'd like you to think for a bit, and maybe you can drop this in the chat box. In your community, what substances do children use? What substances do children use? So here you can see that that children and even young adolescents, they try to start using different substances at different age or different ways. Some of them start with harmful household products like gasoline, paint thinner, industrial glue, kitchen cleaners, cleaning fluids. Also, some of them misuse there is a misuse and diversion of prescribed controlled substances. So these are drugs that are not over the counter. They have to be prescribed by a licensed physician, such as stimulants, central nervous depressants, and opioid analgesics. Also, they tend to have underage use of substances that may be legal for adults. So for example, in many countries, alcohol and tobacco are legal substances for usage of individuals 18 years and above, but not for the minors. Okay. Finally, the use of substances that are illegal in most countries for both minors and adults are also sometimes used by these children, like marijuana and cocaine. Although there are now some countries where marijuana is now not considered not illegal. Now, I'd like to ask all of you, what is the youngest age of a child you know of who takes any of these substances? Or maybe you've heard of a case, let's say a 5-year-old child, you've seen this person smoking or drinking. What's that youngest age? You can type that in the chat box. In most countries, the age at which young people begin to use the substances of interest to us is in middle to late childhood and adolescence. As we just noted, they may start by using harmful household products or alcohol or tobacco, just experimenting, joining parties, depending on what they can easily secure from their homes or their friends. Because we know from decades of research that the earlier they initiate use, the more likely they are to use later in life and become problem users. A major goal of school-based substance use prevention programs is to delay initial use of any psychoactive substance as long as possible, because their brains are still developing, their bodies are still developing. And so if they are exposed to psychoactive substances at a very young age, then it will be detrimental to their health. And sometimes there are irreversible effects to their brains. And that said, many children and youth who begin to use early do not later become problem users. Now, you may ask, and this is something curious, why doesn't everyone who tries a substance continue to use and become addicted? So this varies from person to person. Vulnerability to addiction differs from person to person. And we know about this, right? Let's review the reasons for that. Number one is biological factors, genetics. Some people are genetically predisposed to substance dependence. These are people who have parents who are substance abusers as well. Because remember that or addiction to substances is a health concern rather than a moral dilemma. Okay? It's just like having hypertension. If your parents are both hypertensive, the tendency for the child or youth being hypertensive as well is also increased. That's a risk factor. So genetics is estimated to account for between 40% to 60% of a person's vulnerability to addiction. So again, some people are already genetically predisposed to substance use. Number two is family functioning. So it's very important to also look at the dynamics of the family. The parenting styles will have an effect to of course to a child or to a young person. How the parents relate to the child, how they create family bond, or how they do discipline at home. Next is academic achievement. In a school settings, there are a lot of students who are at risk. So those who have poor academic performance or do not achieve well in school actually are at risk of using substances. Also, there are people or children and adolescents who are isolated. They don't have friends. So they're also at risk of taking in substances or experimenting. They're also at risk of peer pressure just to feel accepted by people. And finally, environmental factors. So if there is accessibility to substances and there are peer and community influences, that can also be a risk factor for a person to become addicted or to continue using a particular substance. So again, it depends on a mix of these four. So again, nature versus nurture. We talk about that in psychology, right? Depends on the biological factors, the upbringing, and the family dynamics, how this person performs in school, and finally, the environmental factors. Basically, the key here is socialization. One of the key themes in substance use prevention is socialization. Now, all human infants are born into a culture. They don't just come into the world on their own. Human beings must be socialized so they become contributing members of their culture and society. Socialization is a lifelong process by which culturally appropriate and acceptable values, attitudes, norms, beliefs, and behaviors are transferred and internalized. So socialization is shaped by a variety of influences, and one of them is the extent to which the child bonds to the institutions that are responsible for the socialization process. So who are these people who socialize with this individual? These are the families, the school, the community, and if they are religious, even their religious or their faith organizations. The other is the extent to which these institutions fulfill their responsibilities in this regard. Some families and school do, while sadly others don't. Peers too, the friends, the friends, and even the cousins, the relatives can serve as very strong socialization agents, especially as children enter into adolescence and then later adulthood. And as such, their multiple influence can be either positive or negative or both. Okay? Let's look closely at who are our socialization agents. Now, I'll give you some time to just absorb what you see here on the screen. Why is the school one of the best places for prevention? Let's review this figure developed by Dr. Shepard Kellam. This diagram shows how families, schools, peers, and workplaces not only have periods of primary significance throughout our lives, but also share periods of influence through socialization. Now, the color of the bars represent each of these microenvironments, while the width of the bars represent the amount of influence these microenvironments play over our lives. So, a wider bar indicates more influence, and a narrower bar means less influence. Let's look at each of these socialization agents in more detail. Okay, these are the social fields and the natural raters, the NRs or the actors. The red bar represents the family of orientation. That is your parents and you, your siblings, the people you grew up with. Okay, so some people do not grow up with their parents, but basically this is about the people who really took care of them. We can see that the influence of our parents extends from birth into middle age, and if we're lucky, into old age. Next here in magenta is the school. The school is influential during early childhood through adolescence, and then ends for many as we enter adulthood when our children go to school and their teachers become part of our own socializing agents. Next is we have the peer groups depicted in the yellow bar. They have the longest period of influence from childhood until the end of life. That's why we always hear, right? Maybe our parents or our mentors saying, you have to choose your friends. Tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. Because actually, they have the longest period of influence in our life. Work, the one in orange, influences us from adolescence to our retirement. So it's also important to choose our workplaces. And the dark blue and green bars represent our family of procreation when we become parents, and again, when our children become parents themselves in our old age. So, as prevention professionals or people working in a school setting, we have to understand that each of these bars represent key settings and opportunities for prevention programming and messaging. And in today's session, we will focus on school as the setting of prevention. Now, you see here on the slide different pictures of schools. In your own school, think of your own school. What do you see when you enter your school? Or when you enter a particular school, maybe the school of your children, or if you're a graduate student right now or an undergraduate student, your own school, or if you're a teacher, think about what you see when you enter a school. How the school looks actually affects the learner's disposition and eventually their behavior too. Do you see clean walls and hallways, or do you see vandalized classrooms? Are the school grounds free of clutter? Is it a school where students feel safe to be in? Is it a school that students can be proud of? But more than the look, students are affected by the socialization that happens in the school. So schools come in all shapes and sizes and configurations, but all countries have schools that are given the role of preparing children and youth to become fully contributing members of their families, workplaces, communities, and their society. That is also a goal of prevention. Now, when you hear about the school, okay, what comes into your mind as its role in prevention? So schools matter so much, okay? And when we talk about prevention, and why do schools matter? With the exception of their own homes, most children spend more time at school than anywhere else. Think, if you have a child right now, think about the routine of your child and where they spend most of their time. Schools and other educational institutions have a particular responsibility for the children enrolled in them to teach students what they need to know to become fully functional and independent citizens as adults, and to fulfill the responsibilities that are required of them at home and in the workplace. In so doing, schools reinforce the positive behaviors that children learn at home and in the community. Therefore, schools are society's most important agent of socialization outside of the family. When families experience problems or because of work-related responsibilities, and when parents have limited time to spend with their children, schools may become the prime agent of socialization. And this is something that happens a lot, especially with families where both parents are working and they're very, very busy. Usually, the prime agent of socialization in that child's life is the school. And for many schools around the world, this is a very large responsibility that they have neither the time nor resources to assume, but they must do their best the way they can with it. And that's not all. Schools are also in an excellent position to help students develop negative attitudes towards all unhealthy and illegal behaviors, including substance use, and to strengthen their positive attitudes towards pro-social behaviors. Students in preschool settings, as well as those in lower and middle schools, are under almost constant adult supervision by their teachers, which provides school staff and teachers with an exceptional opportunity to shape youth's behaviors by rewarding their appropriate behavior and intervening right away when they see antisocial behavior. We can see here that indeed the school personnel have a lot of power in socializing children in school. Let's look at this diagram. This graphic reminds us that everyone at a school affects each other. You have here administration, school board, teaching staff, custodial, students and their families, safety and security. And this means that substance use can affect students or school personnel either during or after school hours and on and off the school grounds. So everyone involved can be affected, but it also means that school-based interventions can have positive effects throughout the school environment. So before we talk about that, let's start with some definitions and how they relate to both students and employees who share the school environment and also share characteristics in regard to their relationship to substance use and its effect on the school. There are four keywords that I have flashed on the screen. We have here school substance use, workplace substance use, student substance use, and workforce substance use. Let's differentiate each. First, let's define the concept of substance use in school and during school hours. For students, this is called school substance use and impairment. So again, this refers to substance use and impairment that occurs while students are in school during school time hours. For example, maybe smoking in toilet cubicles, okay, or at the back of the gymnasium, all right? For employees, this is called workplace substance use and impairment. So again, for employees in school, workplace substance use refers to substance use and impairment that occurs on the job or during work hours. The majority of substance use is actually student and workforce substance use. This means that most substance use occurs out of the school setting, and that is within our next slide. So substance use out of school, what does it mean? Substance use outside of school and school hours is known as student substance use and impairment. So even if they do not take these substances in school, because let's say you have a policy where students are not allowed to smoke in school, still they may do this outside of the school, yet the effects can also be felt while they are in school. For employees, this is also called workforce substance use, which is substance use and impairment outside of the work setting and outside their work hours. So as I've mentioned earlier, most school-related substance use is actually student or workforce substance use, meaning that most occur outside the school setting. Yet, these behaviors can still impact their school performance. And we know that even if we have employees who are already adults, their behavior and their demeanor can also affect our students. So what is the impact of school, okay, versus student substance use? Both school and student substance use negatively impact students and their performance, though in different ways. These negative impacts can dramatically affect schools and the larger community through the loss of adequately prepared adults. So here you can see school substance use and impairment, that is substance use during school hours, or maybe just before school, with impairment occurring at school. Let's say they were drinking right before they went to school. Okay, this can include sleeping while in class, poor academic performance, injuries and accidents, psychological withdrawal. They cannot concentrate in school. They're physically present but mentally absent. Antagonistic behaviors at school. They can become aggressive or violent. On the other hand, student substance use, that is substance use outside of school hours, can still have long-term effects on the student that are experienced while at school. And these effects include absenteeism, tardiness, and suspension or expulsion. Now, look at this pyramid. I'll give you some time to look at the words. This pyramid describes how most schools address the different needs of their students in regard to their behavior. Research suggests that there is a continuum of behavior that guides both prevention and academic interventions. So at least 80% of students in a positive school culture will make positive behavioral choices. That means they are at low risk of using substances. These are children and adolescents who have resolved not to use, or who have no intention at all of using or trying out any substance. That leaves 20%, okay, 20% who represent challenges to school staff. About 15% who require some assistance to help them adjust to the school environment and to their role as students, and 5%, the one in red, who have more serious behavioral problems that interfere with academic success. Many schools do not adjust their programs to address needs of these groups of students. In fact, many schools have policies in place that punish those at this highest risk. However, all students at some point may need more support and more attention to learn appropriate behaviors and decision making. And later, we will talk about that one by one. Now, I'd like you to look at this diagram, which is the spectrum of substance use services. Usually, when you hear the word substance use, the first thing that comes to mind, or the most popular service, is treatment, right? Counseling and treatment. In the early 1990s in the United States, the Institute of Medicine, or IOM, a health policy research organization, developed a different concept of prevention. Within this graphic spectrum of services, it follows from prevention through treatment to maintenance of a substance use-free state using case identification, standard treatment, and other services. Now, let's focus on the three types of prevention services. Please look at the first chunk of pie for prevention. We have here three types of prevention services. We have the universal prevention service, which is for all, regardless of whether they are using substances or not. We have here selective, which is for students who have not yet started using substances but are at risk of using them. And finally, we have the indicated, which is for those who have initiated use of substances but are not dependent to it. Those individuals who have used substances are already using it regularly will have to undergo treatment. Now, in the school setting, prevention interventions are available on a continuum depending on the needs of the students, responding to the continuum of behavioral support laid out in the pyramid which I showed you earlier. So as you can see in that slide, we find that universal prevention is for everyone regardless of risk or vulnerability status. It's for everybody in that pyramid. Two examples of school-based Universal interventions are those that are designed to create a positive school climate or to enhance social skills through a curriculum that all students take. All students are thus exposed to processes and activities that promote healthy decision-making about risky behaviors. Now, you may see that there are also people who are at risk in a school setting. Some students may need a stronger intervention because of some vulnerability. So for these people, we need the selective type of intervention. And who are these vulnerable students? They are probably the students who have alcoholic parents or in a temporary situation such as being new to a school or new to a community. Students here have not yet used substances, but they are at risk or they are more vulnerable. For example, students entering a new school may be vulnerable to peer pressure as they try to fit in and make a new friend. Finally, those students who have exhibited risky behavior need a stronger, more intense intervention, which is the indicated prevention intervention. So now we have just covered the first part of our discussion, which is what is school-based prevention and what are the spectrum of services, as well as the different kinds of substance use in school and out of school settings. Let's now talk about the chunk of our discussion, which is about the components of a school-based prevention. So if you want to create a school-based prevention program in your school, these are the ingredients. We have school policy, positive school climate, and the prevention curriculum. All right. So let's start with school policy. Okay. So why is policy important? Well, it is the first step in a comprehensive prevention approach for schools. There is evidence that having a policy that gives clear direction to students, parents, and staff about substance use is effective in reducing the amount of behavior. The policy must be enforced in order to have an impact. This is also the first step in a comprehensive prevention approach for schools. Evidence of effectiveness in reducing amount of targeted behavior in school is also evident. And when you say policy of school, it gives clear direction to students, parents, staff, and administration. And finally, it must be enforced to have an impact. Now let's look at the international standards for drug use prevention of the UNODC, or the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So the UNODC and the World Health Organization have published two versions of this. The latest one is the one that you can see on the slide. This is the second edition published in 2018. Now let's find out, after they have culled the research literature, they looked at what are the kinds of characteristics of school policies that have been found to be effective in enforcing prevention. So the UNODC, okay, published the International Standards on Drug Use Prevention. They have outlined these qualities of school policies that have been found to have positive outcomes. So you will see on the second column, these are the characteristics of policies that are linked to positive outcomes, and the third column linked to no or negative outcomes. So we have here linked to positive outcomes. Policies clearly specify what substances are, target and what locations and or occasions they apply. So they have to specify the kind of substances, the location where the substance is taken, and the occasions when these policies apply. The policy should reduce or eliminate availability of and access to tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs. So for example, some schools or some countries enforce a law or a regulation where selling of cigarettes and alcoholic drinks is prohibited within, let's say, a 500-meter radius within any school. Okay. And they also have to address infractions of substance use policies with positive sanctions. And that means providing referral to counseling or other support services and not punishment. They also support normal school functioning and not disruption, such as suspension. It is actually a disruption, and support positive school ethos and commitment to school and student participation. So when we talk about ethos here, we talk about the distinguishing characteristics of the school. Now, this approach was found to have a positive impact on substance use among all students as well as school staff. When responses to infractions of these policies are negative, perhaps through suspensions or expulsions, substance rates either remained unchanged or actually it increased. Because when they're suspended, they now have more time at home or elsewhere, to take those substances. There's no adult who will supervise them, right? Furthermore, there is absolutely no evidence that drug testing lowers the occurrence of substance use. And this is quite controversial, which we will discuss a little bit in a bit. All right. In terms of structure and delivery, these effective substance use school policies are more successful with the participation of a range of stakeholders. So when you create a policy, it should be discussed among the stakeholders, such as the students, the parents, and the school staff. And often students and parents, along with school staff, are involved, not just in crafting the policy, but also in enforcing the policy. Finally, prevention policies in the school are most effective when they are implemented with other prevention interventions. Let me highlight that. Policies alone are not effective. If we just have policies, they will be more effective if they are paired with a prevention intervention. Okay? The policies and the interventions deliver the same messages in different ways and support each other. So in summary, here are the characteristics of an effective school policy according to the UNODC and WHO. Specify substances where and when they apply. They have to reduce or eliminate availability of and access to tobacco, alcohol, or other drugs. For substance use policy violations, use positive sanctions such as referral to support services like counseling, support normal school functioning and not disruption of their school functioning, because if they will be missing a lot of academics, and that will maybe make them more at risk of engaging in risky behaviors because they're not anymore achieving in school. Okay, support positive school climate and bonding and participation of stakeholders, and finally implement policy with other evidence-based prevention interventions. Now let's look at, according to research, what are ineffective policies and procedures? Okay, research has found that one, with zero tolerance, okay, this is one of the ineffective policies and procedures. With zero tolerance, leadership must impose rigid discipline policies on certain behaviors without consideration of the circumstances in which the behavior occurred. You know the zero tolerance policy, right? Like, regardless of whatever happened, if it happened, then it has to be sanctioned, okay? And usually, the sanctions here are not light. Zero tolerance policy was created for the most severe behavioral issues, but has grown into a set of policies that creates ill will and distrust, and not the goals intended by the policymakers, which is to create a safer school. With zero tolerance, there are unintended consequences of low graduation rates, dropouts, and poor academic performance. And there is, according to research, an overall negative impact on the school climate. Number two, we have here suspension. Okay, suspension is the punishment most often associated with zero tolerance. So for decades, research has shown that suspension does not change the behavior of the offender in the long term. Again, let me say that again. Suspension, according to research, does not change the behavior of the offender in the long term. Plus, there are unintended consequences of disengagement from school, such as because of the suspension, they have more absences, then it can lead to academic failure and eventually dropout. Suspension does not deter substance use unless it is coupled with assessment and treatment or counseling. Recent studies have shown that reliance on suspension impacts the school climate for all students. In schools with high rates of suspension for substance use, there was a 60% increase in overall substance use for all students over a 2-year period. Now, many educators are exploring various alternatives to suspension and exclusion in many ways, or in ways in which there are consequences for inappropriate behavior with a minimal loss of academic time. And lastly, we have here mandated substance use testing. The most recent research is clear that student substance use testing or drug testing does not live up to our expectation that it will lower the incidence of substance use. Research from several countries have found that student drug testing does not decrease student substance use. Additionally, substance use testing is seen as coercive and lacking respect for students. That's the result, or that those are the results of the studies. Students feel that it lacks respect, and it erodes that relationship of trust, because when they're tested, there is a drug test, then there is a mistrust, an initial thought of mistrust in them. So it hinders communication, that might be critical in getting students the kind of help that they need. Now, not only does it appear that substance use testing in schools does not result in reducing substance use in either the person being tested or the school population in general, critics have identified other factors that should be taken into consideration. Number one, substance use testing is expensive. Okay, so you have to pay for that drug test. The accuracy of the test depends on the quality of the lab also doing the test. So you are familiar with false positives, right? Both false positives and false negatives have negative consequences on the student. And a substance testing program is difficult to administer and takes resources from other educational programs and priorities because it's quite expensive. So if the school has a certain budget, they have to be removing some of those budgets from other educational programs to fund testing, substance use testing. Now, when we talk about zero tolerance and suspension here, we're not saying that this is for all types of offenses. Of course, if there are violence or crime related behaviors, that's a different story altogether. We're just talking here about misbehaviors or let's say substance use in general. Okay, alternatives to suspension. So let's talk about what then are the alternatives to suspension. Most students are not suspended for substance use, violence, or assault, or fights, or life-threatening behavior such as bomb threats or having weapons. The vast majority of suspensions are for non-violent acts such as defiance, disobedience, maybe profanity or disrespect of a school staff or let's say their peers. And this can be considered behavioral errors. Okay? The student may not have the skills to handle a situation in a more appropriate manner. So there are some students who need additional support to follow school rules and policies. Some targeted interventions may have been effective in supporting those students and helping them in developing stronger coping skills. For example, the style of the discipline system is critical. A system that is harsh is not conducive to bonding or increasing student connectedness to school, which we will discuss later. Alternatives to suspension are recommended so that students are not excluded from school, reinforcing their isolation. Okay? So support groups around areas of mutual concern are also important. There are restorative justice practices which can take the more alienated students and move them back into the flow of the school culture. Assessment of students' needs to be undertaken should be undertaken to determine the appropriate direction for them. Again, one size doesn't fit all. Okay, it depends on the situation of the students. So options could include in school service and or referral to other support services beyond the school's resources, even referral to residential treatment, especially for those students who have already fallen into addiction. Okay? So that is school policy. Let's now discuss the next component of school-based prevention, which is school climate. Okay, school climate. So school climate is generally defined as the quality and character of the school and school life. Again, I'll repeat that. School climate is generally defined as the quality and character of the school and school life. The climate can either be positive and lead to students feeling protected and connected to school, or it could be toxic. Okay, they have that fear to be in school, and it could lead students to feeling alienated. The more connected students feel, the less likely, the more connectedness, okay, that students feel towards their school, the less likely that they will engage in substance use or other risky behaviors, and the more likely that they will achieve academically. So again, the keyword here is connecting students in school, and that is only through a positive school climate. Schools with a positive climate and culture have a shared vision to which everyone contributes. Now, from both the education and substance use prevention research, we know that students cannot learn if they feel unsafe in their school environment. To bond or connect with school, the climate must be physically safe, emotionally safe, and socially safe. For many, school can be a haven from violence. And students' physical safety is just the beginning. That is, in many schools, students and faculty may have to live with the threat of violence and aggressive or delinquent behavior. Included in the threat of violence is, of course, both sexual coercion and harassment, as it relates not only to girls, but also to boys. Thus, students need to know that they are safe from the threat of any kind of psychological or emotional harm or sexual violation or harassment from either peers or staff, school staff. And this includes the teachers. In addition, they must feel socially safe. This means that they are in an environment that does not allow and that actively takes steps to prevent or stop bullying and teasing, so that they will feel emotionally safe. As you know, teasing and bullying are now taking a wide variety of forms, including the use of electronic media like Facebook and other social media, to sending harassing text and pictures. A discussion of the prevention of these behaviors, which are increasing rapidly as these media become more widely available, is beyond the scope of our discussion today. However, it's very important to bring it up here because um, we have to be reminded that schools should assume responsibility for the prevention of a wide array of behaviors that may compromise their students' physical and mental health, and not just substance use. So students in a more protective, positive environment report not only less substance use, but they engage in fewer risk-taking behaviors and have more regular attendance patterns and do better academically. All right. Now, most students, okay, so you can see here that um, there are a lot of students here who have to, as we have said, have to feel safe, right? So what kind of culture is that? Let's look at some of this quotation from Rutter and et al. In 1994. School's climate could increase or decrease the risk of antisocial behavior. So we can see here how important school climate is. It may influence also the behavior of the students, not just by um, attracting these students to doing this antisocial behavior, but also they can be victims of this antisocial behavior. Also, we have here from Najaka, Gottfredson, and Wilson, environmentally focused interventions were effective in reducing delinquent behavior and substance abuse. And finally, amount of connectedness predicts the likelihood of aggression and victimization. Okay? So let's talk about school connectedness. Okay? What is school connectedness? School connectedness refers to the students' belief that adults at school care about them as individual learners and people. These are the 5 factors that the ADD Health Study used on its survey. These are the statements that comprise connectedness. I feel close to people at this school. Okay? I am happy to be at this school. I feel that I am part of this school. I feel safe in my school. The teachers at this school treat students fairly. So if you look at these statements, when we talk about connectedness, we talk about closeness, happiness, feeling that they belong to the school, they are a part of the school, they feel safe in the school, and they are treated fairly. Notice that there are 4 items that talk about how I personally feel and the personal interaction I have at my school. The fifth one is something that I observe happening to others, that teachers at this school treat others fairly. Well, I may be treated fairly at this school, but I may see other students not treated fairly, and that actually has an impact on my connectedness and perception of the school climate. So focusing on how the climate of a school can lead to students feeling more engaged with the institution has multiple advantages when dealing with youth who can make good life choices. Let's briefly review the concepts from research, which describes how bonding and connectedness to school develop in students through these 5 elements. You remember that maybe if you've encountered the resiliency wheel here on our slide, you may remember that high supported expectations require that students have the tools and skills to meet those expectations. So as educators, it is our job to provide the tools as well as those expectations. Secondly, we know that life skills, okay, teaching life skills. Life skills are important and need to be taught at age-appropriate times. But not all students come to our classes well equipped with life skills. So if we are to build bonding, we need to address those deficits. So when we talk about life skills, this encompasses communication skills, negotiation skills, um, uh, learning how to say no, okay? Saying no to peer pressure. This is refusal skills. We call that refusal skills. They know how to relate with other people. They know how to make friends. All right. That these are part of life skills. All educators also need to show care and concern to help each student reach his or her goals and full potential. We just reviewed this concept earlier when we talk about the importance of connectedness. At the same time, we need to ensure that our policies and behavior establish clear and consistent boundaries. So lastly, we have here providing meaningful opportunities for participation, which gives students the need to practice their decision making and problem solving. They get to try out adult ways to be in control of their lives and futures. So an example of that is if you have clubs, interest clubs and organizations in school, that actually can build that positive climate, okay? And it can build the skill set of those students. It's very good to have those extra and co-curricular activities where they get to try out those adult ways of living lives or deciding. When we talk about school climate, we also talk about the power of relationships. So while those 5 activities are important in the resiliency wheel, much of what makes these activities successful are the relationships between students and teachers and among the students themselves. Finding ways for each student to have a connection with at least one adult in the school increases the opportunities for mentoring and modeling the tools and skills needed for the transition to adulthood. Positive relationships have the potential to discover and support the best behavior in our students. These same relationships offer adult support and guidance when students have challenges such as substance use. Here we also have treating students as resources in the school provides them with the respect and motivation to engage in school activities. Students can be active partners in the adult efforts to reduce substance use and improve school climate. And they can actually be good sounding boards in the policy development process. So do not underestimate the power of relationships to get things done, such as by providing mentoring and role models, strengthening feelings of self-worth, providing a sounding board for problem solving, and providing a safety net, build a strong and building a strong, protective, positive school climate. Therefore, any activity or effort for the students to feel that they belong in their school, that they can be proud of their school, and that they love their school, all of these contribute to building a positive school climate. So if you're a school administrators should actually invest in those kinds of activities and efforts. Now we've come to the last part of our discussion, which is prevention curricula, which is the last component of school-based prevention. The third component is the prevention curriculum. And this is the curriculum or program to be taught in schools to build student skills that will help them stay away from using substances. So you remember earlier when we talked about school-based prevention, we are not just stopping students or preventing them from using or initiating use of substances. We are also guiding them to building skill sets that they need to make the right decisions in their lives. First is, let's talk about evidence-based prevention, okay, or prevention curriculum. It's very important for the prevention curriculum that we will choose to implement in school to be evidence-based. So what does evidence-based mean? According to the UNODC standards, evidence-based practice is the use of systematic decision-making processes or provision of services which have been shown through available scientific evidence to consistently improve measurable client outcomes. Instead of tradition, gut reaction, or single observations as the basis of decision-making, EBP or evidence-based practice relies on data collected through experimental research and accounts for individual client characteristics and clinical expertise. So usually, people, when they try to create, some schools, when they try to create prevention programs, they will just go by gut feeling. I think that it will be good to do this. Okay? But let's look at what the UNODC says. To do that, we have to understand first who our students are. Let's start with middle childhood. So middle childhood generally includes children around age 6 through 10 years. And this is the elementary school age. Middle childhood is a period when children acquire the skills needed to relate to the world outside of their families, mostly in school settings and with the same age peers. Now, while the family remains the principal source of safety and support, daycare, school, and peer groups begin to take on an increasing role in influencing the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of children. As the brain continues to develop, emergent cognitive and emotional regulatory functions become key during this period. So during middle childhood, children learn to maintain attention, they can control their emotions. Now they become more open to new people, even those who look different from them. Um, and and they're now more receptive to new ideas and behaviors. And they are more effective in communicating their needs now because they have learned more vocabulary words, and they're more accurate in identifying or labeling their emotions. So what does the UNODC say about that? So here are evidence-based strategies for middle childhood or for the 6 to 10-year-old children. So for this age group, 3 interventions and a prevention policy have fairly good indication of efficacy with a range of evidence indicating from 4 stars to 2 stars, meaning from very good to adequate evidence when evaluated by the UNODC standards group. Let me clarify. When you see here 4 stars, very good, 3 stars good, and 2 stars adequate, the two stars there doesn't mean that they are less effective. It only means that there are those with 4 stars actually have more, okay, more evidence or research done. So all of these programs can and do involve the school setting, like parenting skills programs. They can generally recruit parents from schools working with school administrators or may actually be delivered in a school setting. So let's look at them one by one. We have here parenting skills programs, personal and social skills education, classroom environment improvement programs, the policies that we have said earlier, policies to keep children in school, and community-based multi-component programs. When we talk about community-based multi-component programs, this talks about the local government units or the non-government organizations being part or taking part of these interventions. So what works in school-based prevention for middle childhood? So therefore, in middle childhood, if you're going to create a program, it should focus on self-control, emotional awareness, communication, problem solving in social situations, academic support to develop those reading skills, because they have to feel that they are capable in school. The moment that a student knows that they cannot read, their other academic programs or their academics will actually fail. Okay, they will have a lot of problems after that. So again, these are the things that we have to focus on when we're dealing with children from 6 to 10 years old. Now, notice that none of this talks about drugs or substances, right? But it's actually building in them the foundational skills that they need. Next, let's talk about the early adolescence. Okay, here's a quick reminder of what's going on when children become adolescents. So adolescence is a period of many challenges as the brain continues to develop in the context of hormonal and other normal biological processes. The adolescent developmental period is fraught with stress and erratic emotions that can lead to poor decision making, thus increasing the likelihood of engaging in risky behaviors that may have negative health and social outcomes. So you're familiar with the term YOLO, right? You only live once, so let's do it. And one time, one of my former students said, "If it feels right, it must be right." That's very, very risky. That kind of thinking is very risky. So this developmental period focuses on the enhancement of their self-regulation and control of their emotions and behaviors. This is a period in which we learn those social and emotional skills that enable us to establish stable, intimate relationships with others. When we learn to be more sensitive to the feelings and needs of other people, when we learn how to control anger and aggressive feelings, which can lead to handling conflicts in a positive way. So let's look at what the UNODC standards say are effective strategies for early adolescents. Now, you can see here the first one, which is parenting skills program in gray. It doesn't mean that it's not any more effective. It is still very much effective. It's just in gray because we have already mentioned that earlier. But there are new programs here that are also evidence-based for early adolescents. So we have here prevention education based on personal and social skills and social influence. So this is for the universal and selective group. This means that we also continually need to build their personal skills and social skills. And next, we have the school policy and culture, which we have discussed earlier. And finally, addressing individual psychological vulnerabilities. So for more at-risk populations, interventions that provide individual attention, such as those that address psychological vulnerabilities, have adequate evidence of effectiveness. So what works in school-based substance use prevention for early adolescents? The program should focus on communication, peer relationships, and personal and social skills, self-efficacy and assertiveness. They have to assert themselves. Substance use resistance skills. Do you know that many young people do not know to how to say no? Okay. So we need to teach them the refusal or resistance skills and reinforcement of anti-drug attitudes and norms. They have to think that it's not normal for their age to take substances. Okay? They have to believe that these substances have harmful effects in their body. Strengthening personal commitments against drug use and support for study habits and academic achievement. So in summary, we have here the basics of evidence-based prevention interventions. So what are the basics? What are the basics of evidence-based prevention interventions? We have here content, structure, and delivery. So from research, there are foundations of evidence-based school prevention interventions. We will cover each of this. So when you plan your own prevention strategy or prevention program in school, first you have to think about the content. What will be the content of my curriculum? The curriculum content targets many items from behavior change theories that have been tested and shown to be effective skills for youth. So here are some of the various personal and social skills that substance prevention programs typically include. We need to teach them self-control, emotional awareness, communication, problem solving, decision making, which includes the ability to slow down responses to challenging situations, anticipate and consider the consequences of their own behaviors, teaching them how to weigh the relative merits and liabilities of various responses, and the skills to resist invitations to use those substances. We also have to build their self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that I can. They have to believe that they can, and that assertiveness in them. And also behavioral beliefs, strengthening anti-substance use attitudes by teaching knowledge about the immediate consequences of substance use, and critical examination of media advertising related to substance use. Do you notice perhaps in TV ads or even in social media, when youth would look at, let's say, like artists, like celebrities who would be taking, let's say, a particular alcohol, and they will say, wow, it looks cool, I want to look like that person. Okay, so we have to teach them how to critically examine the media that appears in their social media feed. Also, we have to teach them the norms, establishing social norms that substance use by children and adolescents is not acceptable. That has to be taught to them. It's not acceptable. And sometimes this could be challenging because maybe they see their parents doing it, but in school, it has to be reinforced. Changing normative perceptions that substance use by peers is prevalent. And finally, intent. Strengthening personal commitments. We have to strengthen their personal commitment not to use those substances. In terms of structure, this should be carefully matched to the developmental stage of the student. So for example, if you're dealing with 6-year-old children, we do not typically talk about substances to them. Okay? So again, we have to match that developmental stage and the kind of structure and the content to be given to them. Typically, if you look at evidence-based curricula, it's 10 to 15 weekly sessions lasting 45 to 50 minutes each. And lessons are highly structured and they follow a curriculum guide. The teacher or facilitator training is essential. You cannot just ask any teacher to handle that prevention curriculum. That teacher has to be trained, okay? So that the messaging is clear and consistent. Teachers interact with their students in a positive manner. Lastly, we talk here about delivery and interactive teaching. Establish a classroom atmosphere that is accepting, non-threatening, and non-judgmental, and to facilitate class discussions. We also have to recognize and verbally reward students' ideas, ask appropriate follow-up questions or probes, and establish and monitor small groups in which all students can participate in the curriculum, practice a variety of personal and social skills, and express themselves in a free and trusting exchange of ideas. I'm now on my last part of my presentation. Let's briefly talk about what strategies or practices, what practice does not work in school-based prevention. So, what does not work in school-based prevention? First is non-interactive instructional methods such as lecturing. If the teacher is only doing lecturing, then maybe the students, we are not very sure if the students have really learned. Next is utilizing unstructured discussion. So for example, if you want to teach them life skills and you don't have a particular plan, then that can also go wrong. Okay? Because we're not sure if your desired outcomes will be achieved. Third is increasing students' knowledge by providing facts concerning specific substances, which may simply make the students more informed consumers. This is also very, very common and funny. You know, why funny? Because sometimes our intention of telling them this is harmful, this is the particular drug, if you're going to take this substance, these are the particular effects that you may feel. If we do that, actually, the students may be more informed consumers. Okay, so we have to balance that, and that has to be carefully planned. Also, posters and pamphlets may not necessarily work for the kind of generation of students that we have because none of them may be reading them. Another one, look at this bullet, using ex-drug users to provide testimonials, which may glamorize or sensationalize substance use. So this is also very interesting because some schools are doing this. They would invite an ex-drug user or yes, someone who has already recovered to give a testimonial of their recovery. That's good. However, this is not evidence-based in a prevention setting because children will be thinking, okay, now you're well. So if I take this substance, I will be well like you in the long run. I can do it too. And that's not true. Not everyone responds to treatment in the same way, right? So there is no assurance that if they take a substance now, they will be able to recover, like these people whom we can ask to give testimonials. However, ex-drug users may be better off at giving testimonials among those who are already dependents on substances, but not for prevention, okay? Not in a school setting. Also focusing on building self-esteem only. So it's not enough, right? They have to learn that wide array of skill set. Random drug testing. Okay, another ineffective popular strategy is random drug testing. Unfortunately, random drug testing has been incorporated into many school substance use policies. Despite its considerable cost, many people supported its widespread dissemination because of its potential as a deterrent. The reason for the support of this approach was that if students knew that they were likely to be tested for the presence of a variety of substances, they would be less likely to use and indeed would have a credible excuse not to use if invited to do so by peers. But controlled evaluations and research of the effects of drug testing have generally failed to yield anticipated effects. Perhaps because students knew that the likelihood that they may be tested in any given week was relatively low. Now, that is not to say that drug testing is never useful. It certainly can be effective as a prevention tool, but not an intervention. This is particularly relevant within the context of students who are being subjected to testing for cause. That is when they have been suspected of using or they have been previously identified as users and are being monitored to ensure that they remain free. So that's okay for them. But from the perspective of primary prevention, drug testing has not been found to be effective, particularly in relationship to its costs and the burdens associated with administration. These include not only the cost of the test itself, but also monitoring the students while they provide samples and then establishing what is called a chain of custody. Who will handle this? Who will handle this later on? Next is we have scare tactics and exaggerated, frightening examples that doesn't work in the school setting among our youth and children, because they would say, "Oh, you're saying that smoking can kill, but my grandfather is smoking and he is still alive." Okay, so it doesn't work. So it has to be realistic, okay, and fact based. Any standalone single event activities in place of activities that are ongoing, comprehensive, and developmentally appropriate is also not effective. For example, they would say a drug-free fair, which is a one-time event, and then there's no follow-up, no training for that. That is not also effective. So before I end, I have prepared a video for you. You can take a screenshot or you can take a picture of this slide. I created a video for you on how to search an evidence-based program for your own school. And this is the Blueprints Registry. So in this video, you will see me explaining how to look for evidence-based programs, which is the prevention curriculum that you can implement in your own school. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining us today. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brador Rabajante. I love the fact that you ended the presentation with what doesn't work. That's really great. We have two questions from the chat box. Let me read it. So the first one is, what does an ideal school climate look like for you? And how close are the schools today to that reality?
Okay, when we say about an ideal school climate, it may be it's not very obvious sometimes, but one thing is for sure, how the students feel connected in that school. If you have children, probably you've experienced them like they do not want to miss school. For example, even if they're sick, "Mom, I still want to go to school." Or if classes are suspended because of typhoon, they're sad about it. They miss their classmates, they miss their teachers. That is one of the ideal school settings that we want to see. Okay, that's the kind of climate that we want to see in any school. That they feel that connectedness, they're proud of their school, they wear their uniform so proudly, and they're not afraid to tell people, I graduated from this school, I came from this school, I'm attending this school. Many schools are like that today. And that creation of a positive school climate is not very foreign to us, actually, to all of us. We have, maybe right now you can think of a school that is like that. But more than just the school climate, as we have said earlier, when we talk about school-based prevention, a school climate is just one of the components. Aside from building a positive school climate where students feel safe and connected, what do they learn in school? Okay, and are they just learning academics? They have to feel that they have to also be prepared for life, and those are the life skills that they have to learn. Thank you. I hope that I
Thank you.
answered that question. Thank you.
And the last question is, what kind of challenges do you face as a drug addiction professional in implementing prevention programs in school?
Okay. Um, One of the things that maybe prevention professionals experience in a school setting is bringing in people to work as a team. When you are a prevention professional, and any teacher, any school staff can be a prevention professional with the right training, uh, it is not just implementing programs, it's actually an advocacy. And you need people or a team or a committee to do that. For example, you need a group of people you have to enjoin a group of people to review the school policies. Do we have restorative school policies? This cannot be done just by one coordinator or one point person or one counselor. It has to be a team. So bringing in people, engaging them, making them commit to the task is one of the challenges that we may probably face. And this is maybe a right time. There is a training for that. There is a training which I introduced earlier, the Universal Prevention Curriculum for School-Based Prevention. There are, in that particular training, people are taught how to persuade people or to have buy-in and to participate in creating a prevention leadership action team, because actually that's the first step. No, you're bringing in a team and then churning in the gears, making things work for your school setting. Thank
Thank
you.
you. So, we would like to take Dr. Lay Labrador Rabajante. I always, yeah, I'm sorry, I know her as
Full
Lay
family
Labrador.
name.
So I'm
Thank you.
always tongue-tied. So for an excellent presentation and as a reminder, so I think like her presentation encapsulated everything that we should remember in terms of school-based prevention, right? So gearing towards the traditional punitive approach is essential in making sure that our students and the school in general actually benefits from actual programs. And just before we end, let me just share our I say DDR's upcoming activities, so just so you guys know. So I hope you see that. So tomorrow there's a credentialing conversation. If you're interested in taking the credentialing or renewing the credentials, attend tomorrow. In June 12th, we have the president of Inibria, which is the international organization for brief intervention and screening. So screening and brief intervention. So that's going to be June 12th. June 17, we have Dr. Richard Brosson and Dr. Kamram Nias from World Health Organization. And July 11, again from World Health Organization, we have Dr. Brandon Gray and Dr. Dimitri for different topics. So please do register. I actually sent that in the chat box. Like for the links, if you were not able to find it, visit our website and also our Facebook page so that you get to see it. Again, thank you, Dr. Lay, and thank you everyone for being here. And if you have, we'll send a copy of her presentation so that if you have questions, maybe, or if you want to collaborate, you can reach out to her. So that's it for the day. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening for those of you in Asia and for the rest of us in some places in the world. Like, have a great day. Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much.